What's up, guys? This is Tom Fazio. Welcome to the channel if you are new. Welcome back if you are not. For those of you who are familiar with some of the content I put out, I tend to focus on stuff related to mind-body development, my mind-body system, weightlessness, peak performance, a little bit of martial arts, you know, cool personal growth shite. Taking a bit of a tangent within a short video series here, looking at kind of a series of thought problems, cognitive biases, stuff that underlies some of the thought behind my new book, Law of the Die, which is fundamentally trying to address the question, can good luck be designed? The book is fiction, the thought behind it is not, and so I'm having a little bit of fun here exploring some of the principles and what I consider thought problems that lead to a lot of issues and problems in our own lives, decision making. And that provide a lot of insight for, better decision making in the future, and how, in particular, we can maybe embrace randomness to produce more good luck. And so this particular video looking at what I'm calling the volatility problem. All right, so volatility is an interesting thing. What is it, after all? Let me give you a couple of analogies, right? So if you're watching this video, you've probably watched many more on YouTube. You've seen films. You understand that some things are shot in slow motion, some things not. But there's something that is interesting that happens when you slow down footage, right? So if you film, let's take two types of, what do you call it, frames per second. Let's say that right now I'm shooting in 24p, right? 24 frames a second. Let's take two that one might be 30 frames, slightly more frames, having a little bit more information per second, right? And then let's take 120 frames a second. So when you film something, the amount of time it takes to film the same scene in both frame rates is identical, but what happens is in post, you slow the 120 frames down, let's say to 30 frames, so that now you have the same number of frames that you shot in 30 frames and 120, but the second one shot in 120 frames is now stretched to 4 times the original speed, right? 120 divided by 30 is 4. So now it's 4 times slower. And so what happens is, let's say you're doing a handheld shot, right? I'm in Vietnam. I can look out my window. I see, a farmer working in the rice paddies out here. And so if I shoot that particular scene in these two types of frame rates, and I'm using a handheld shot. The one that I'm shooting handheld at 30 frames per second is going to look a little bit jittery, right? You're going to notice all the bumps, the inconsistencies in the way that I'm holding the camera. It's going to have a little bit of wobbles. You see this in a lot of films, like the Jason Bourne films are predominantly handheld, especially during a lot of the action sequences. But then if you look at the film that I shot in 120 and you replay that and you slow it down in post, all those bumps and jitters are pretty much going to be gone. And this is a great example of, on the one hand, volatility is about variance, right? So if you have a constant in life, let's say that you are a farmer in the Midwest in America, you have a lot of constants, not a lot changes, maybe over decades, right? Let's say that you're an inner city, a New Yorker who is constantly, let's say you're in finance. I mean, every day is different. You have high stakes, high consequences. You don't know what to expect when you get to work. This is considerably more volatile than somebody watching corn grow, right, in general. Anything could throw that off, but the one thing that we could say is, analogous to this, is that the speed of change is just as devastating as change itself. So if you take the change of a farmer's life where maybe that farmer is gradually losing business over time, right? Or maybe he's not making enough money to sustain his farm. More often than not, this is going to be a long-term process where he has to decide if he's going to throw in the towel or find another, way of making business work. Take that in contrast to a trader in New York, or somebody in 2008 that over the course of a couple of months or days, in fact, they went belly up because they had too much exposure to risk. So this is an example of speed, right? And there was a great quote by Mike Tyson's mentor and coach, Customato, who always said, speed kills, right? If you look back at some of the old training methods, he was always trying to make Mike faster and faster, and Mike was unbelievably fast, right? Unbelievably fast. in the way that he fought. And it's the same thing, that if you slowly apply pressure, right? You guys have seen the kind of feats of strength or the magician's exercise where they lay down and they drive a semi on top of the, or probably not a semi truck, but what do you call them? A truck of some kind. And they park one wheel on the abs of that person, right? And then they slowly drive it off. Well, there's a certain amount of pounds of pressure that it's on that person's abdomen. If you were to compare that to physically dropping the same amount of pressure at a faster rate onto that person's abs, it's incomparable in terms of the impact, right? The former you might be able to hold for a second, the latter would just decimate your midsection. Right, so all of us can understand this on an intuitive basis, right? That change in general is not easy for most of us to bear. Change that happens quickly is very difficult to bear. The only way to manage these things is by being adaptable, by having a strong intuition or a sensitivity to change that's occurring outside, and having an internal fortitude and resilience to be able to weather those changes. I talk about a lot of this stuff in the context of weightlessness and mind-body development, because a big part of this equation is how we prime ourselves to be able to weather change, how we frame it, the perspectives that we take, and the physical, the mind-body capacity that we have to be able to deal with it. But the other side of this is, well, how can we put ourselves in a position externally through creating more options to weather the types of volatility that might impact us, right? So for example, if you've got, and this happened in 2008, if you've got all your money in a 401k or invested with somebody that's managing your funds, and the market takes a shit, and that is where all of your capital is tied up, the way that's going to hit is hard, right? And this is a case in point where if you had more options or more exposure to other types of upside, or less exposure in that one domain, right? Maybe you also have a business, a side business on the side. Maybe you've diversified and put some capital in other areas. This is a way where the volatility, when and if it hits, may not hit all of your assets or all of the elements of your life in the same types of ways, right? It's really in these cases where it hits something that is really critical or fundamental to the way that you live and perceive your own value in life, that it can be devastating. And so a big part of the conversation around law of the die is, well, how can we increase the exposure to upside across a variety of domains, or within domains that particularly matter? How can we diversify our attention and our risk exposure within that, so that if and when volatility hits, it benefits us instead of hurts us, right? And that's a big challenge, but a big key kind of focal point. So guys, this was probably not my most articulate video on the topic, but hopefully it shed a little bit of insight into how we can think about volatility and maybe make choices to prepare for it in different ways. Like a lot of people say, well, I do my best, and if randomness hits or if volatility hits, I'll just weather it the best that I can. And that's great, except that it buries a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people fail, and we talked about the stupidity problem in the last video, but not everybody survives those types of things. And so if you can put yourself in a position to benefit from volatility instead of get killed by it, in my mind, this is the way that we ought to be approaching it. It makes you much more resilient and robust and, in Nassim Taleb's terms, anti-fragile, right, to be able to gain from disorder. So that's my thoughts on this. Guys, if you're interested, I do have an appendix to Law of the Die that is nonfiction that explores some of these fun topics on my website. Subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get it for free at no cost. Some pretty cool shit. And yeah, you'll find the link in the description. Other than that, like, subscribe if you're into that, if you've enjoyed this, and be weightless. And I'll see you in the next video.